find it weird that we had a real-life, actual, proper big-budget live-action Pokemon movie 7 years ago and we never talk about it anymore? Like, we don't reference it, meme it, even mention it? The Pokemon community is many things. Diverse, chaotic, complicated, but more than anything I would say, we are nostalgic little nerds. We love childhood stuff and cozy memories and pixel art and the past. We always revisit everything this franchise has to offer, from Pokemon Dash to stadium minigames or, rebuild the entirety of Kanto and Pokopia. We keep going back again and again to everything this franchise has to offer and yeah, CEO of Sinnoh, we get it. You got jump scared by Cynthia in Undella Town, why is that such a big deal? It's literally a fight you can refuse. You already posted about it twice this month, please chill. But Detective Pikachu discourse is basically non-existent. Pokemon's 30th anniversary celebration a few weeks ago felt like the perfect opportunity to mention a possible sequel, and I actually added Detective Pikachu 2 Electric Pikachu to my prediction bingo board because Nintendo is currently loving this project, but it went completely unnoticed. In an industry that is obsessed with franchises and sequels, this is very unusual for a surprisingly well-received 2019 film. A film that succeeded in an era when entertainment journalists would keep repeating again and again about the scary video game adaptation curse. Not only did we get live-action Pokemon, which, if you are ever 8 years of age, you understand the appeal of, but we got a well-reviewed live-action Pokemon. However, its cultural impact, both in pop culture and in the Pokemon fandom, was basically no. Nobody posts screen caps on Tumblr or clips on YouTube Shorts. It's almost always forgotten in everyone's favorite Pokemon movie list. To investigate why even with a multi-million-dollar budget, the first ever live-action Pokemon film is less talked about in the community than Pokemon Secrets of the Jungle, I decided to invite fellow YouTuber Anthony Gramuglia to this little video. Say hi, Ant.
Why yes, hello there.
We have been talking about writing something together for months now, and Ant loves hyper-focusing on nerdy media, movie budgets, and having a crush on Pokemon characters. Pun intended, I think investigating Detective Pikachu would be the perfect topic for us, don't you think so?
I am here for this discussion. We've been trying to talk for a while now in collab. I've been sending her messages and all this stuff trying to get on your show. I'm glad you finally answered from a small YouTuber like myself. Yeah, so obviously I'm a huge fan of Pokemon. In fact, I'm going to show you guys something. First time on YouTube, I have this. This is a 30-year-old Fat Pikachu plush when I was a kid. And so I'm going to perch it on my shoulder for the entire video. And so let's talk about Detective Pikachu right now, and this won't be annoying fast at all. I'm just gonna, you know what? I'm just gonna sit there. I'm just gonna sit there. We're not touching the thing. So just so you know, this entire video, there is in fact a dead 30-year-old Pikachu at my feet. So hopefully you don't take a step or trip over it. Back to you, by the way.
Well, my 30-year-old Fat Pikachu is in arguably less optimal conditions, but that is probably due to the fact that as a kid, I would LARP around with my friends and throw Pikachu at people shouting, "Pikachu, choque de trovão agora!" which is besides the point. It's Detective Pikachu, right? To circle back, there's something weird about it. Back in 2019, marketing for this movie was everywhere. Dancing Pikachu clips were on all my friends' Facebook feeds, even non-Pokemon people, but honestly, when was the last time you thought about this film? Do you remember any lines? What's the name of Justice Smith's character? 5 seconds. If you played it on the DS, you're not allowed to answer. Yeah, me neither. Like, I'm sure most of the subscribers of this channel can immediately tell me a memorable line from Ash, but I literally run a Pokemon channel on the internet, and when I see Justice Smith, I think of a Zelda TV globe, and kind of nothing else. And my theory is that Detective Pikachu, despite being a film that people thought was good when it came out, failed as a Pokemon film for a simple reason. Detective Pikachu is afraid of Pokemon. But before I begin, do you even remember the plot of Detective Pikachu?
Detective Pikachu is the story of a young adolescent named Tim Goodman. Yeah, a Goodman, right in the nose there, huh? Pokemon Company. He couldn't be a little more subtle, maybe Badman or whatever. He was going to be this big Pokemon trainer, but then his family kind of fell apart. Quite violently, actually. His mom dies, his father, Harry, being this world-famous detective, living in Rhyme City, just kind of leaves his son behind. It's kind of vague there. However, Harry is apparently killed in a car crash. he's not really killed in the car crash, but he's apparently killed. So Tim has to go to Rhyme City to go grab his dad's stuff, and he ends up meeting his dad's partner Pokémon, a Pikachu with a weird detective hat, who Tim, for some reason, understands. He has the voice of Ryan Reynolds, apparently. The two investigate Harry's disappearance, which leads them down the path of illegal Pokemon fights and corporate espionage, and Mewtwo, apparently. Honestly, this is one of the better video game movies that have come out to this day, I think. I mean, it's up there with the Sonic films. Not as good as Sonic, but up there. It was one of the first family-friendly video game movies to be of pretty high quality. And the film did well, financially at least. $433.1 million against a budget of $150 million. It actually grossed $100 million more than that first Sonic film, though the film costs were lower for Sonic, so maybe it was a little more profitable. To this day, Detective Pikachu is the 6th highest grossing theatrical video game movie of all time, ahead of 2 of the 3 Sonic films, with obviously 3 being the one that's above it. And yet Sonic got a trilogy, while Detective Pikachu exists. Now, first off, I want to establish that a film does not need sequels to be good. There are tons of fantasy films that are perfectly fine on their own. The Dark Crystal, for example, or Labyrinth, both Jim Henson productions, they come to mind first. And they had resurgences in popularity after a decade of release, after being pretty much unremarked on in their day. But video game movies are unique in that they have these large IPs that have a lot of material to draw from. So the fact that there wasn't a follow-up is noticeable. So why hasn't it gotten a sequel? Video games are cursed. Or at least that's been the belief with live action adaptations. While Sonic the Hedgehog and Super Mario Bros. Have kind of erased the stigma of theatrical released video game movies, for a while adaptations of video games were associated with poor quality, and quite honestly, for good reason. For better or worse, Nintendo is really accountable for a lot of the bad stereotypes around video game movies. While animation has always been a little excused for this, don't forget the Pokémon films were generally well received by their fan base and audience, and the Angry Birds films, well, they exist and probably make money. That Super Mario Bros. Movie, though, that came out in the 90s, the first major live-action video game movie, is well regarded as trash. I kinda like it, but it's trash. It takes this colorful Mushroom Kingdom and turns it into Max Headroom's cyberpunk dystopia horror. It might have landed better if the film didn't also suck as a story, but it does suck because the character writing is terrible, so what are you gonna do? Mortal Kombat for a while was regarded as the best the genre had to offer, mostly due to that incredible kick-ass song that played in every single school dance for a decade. The majority of the films, though, were kind of just brand recognizable slop, though, weren't they? You had exceptions, of course, like Warcraft or Silent Hill, but you either got mediocre films or unremarkable ones. For example, Tomb Raider, inconsistent, serviceable, a good film to watch at like midnight on FX. But you got a lot of things like Street Fighter, or the Resident Evil live-action films, or even worse still, UA Bowl. If you associate UA Bowl with the genre, that means you're probably old, like I am, or you kind of see video game movies as a tax exemption. A trick for sleazy, hopeless directors to make a quick buck, making absolute trash. I think Super Mario Bros., the new one specifically, works because it is so fluid and is so true to the aesthetic of the games. The quality of the films is not really what matters, it's the aesthetic that counts. The Pokémon anime film works because they're an extension to the anime series that masterfully adapted the games, but most importantly, their aesthetic. They're fantastic iterations of the game experience. But the question is, why take an essentially beloved game and make it live action? Animation is increasingly undervalued as a medium, and it continues to pump out successful films, mostly due to the color and vibrancy available to animation and all that. Compositing and CG special effects aren't really a problem when everything is done in the same visual language, the same style. You can bring about imaginative fantastic creatures and worlds beyond belief with the same effort it would take to render someone's hairs. Bowser takes as much effort as the individual strands of Mario's mustache. Legend of Zelda, I feel, being adapted to live action in part because people want to see that world. They want to see it more seriously. Zelda you can film in New Zealand and it looks like Zelda. But it's also a world more equipped to being adapted to live action because it is more grounded. It's Lord of the Rings, it's Game of Thrones, it's epic fantasy. We know epic fantasy can work on screen. Mario, though, involves hopping on armies of turtles and eating mushrooms. That's a little more imaginative and tricky to do in live action. And Pokémon, for a while, was associated with that more imaginative, more impossible style of storytelling. I think that's why when we heard they were making a live-action Detective Pikachu movie specifically, folks like me kind of paused a bit. What, they're gonna take the jump from the games to live action? Like, how do you make Pikachu look good in live action? How do you make Gengar or Mr. Mime look good in live action? Well, I think honestly giving Pikachu a voice like Ryan Reynolds, even though it was a Danny DeVito role, and I'm going to argue that Danny DeVito should have been Pikachu this whole time. It would have been so much funnier if he was Pikachu. Give him Wario, you bastards! That's why the film works so perfectly. Or at least that's why Ishihara feels so. To quote Ishihara, Ryan Reynolds has surpassed my imagination. At the stage when the initial CG was moving, I felt that we had taken an extremely difficult challenge. But when Ryan Reynolds' voice was dubbed in, it created the reality of Pikachu as a living thing. Totally new and unlike anything we had ever seen or even imagined. Truly, it felt like a totally different, new life breathed into him. And then that Pikachu became even more appealing, alongside the performance of Justice Smith as Tim. Simply put the right voice to it, and you get the right production. But was that enough? Well, evidently not.
Video game movies are most certainly not cursed anymore. We know they can deliver incredibly fun, engaging stories while staying faithful to the original creative vision of their series. And in the time since Detective Pikachu was released, the Naked Except for Sneakers Hedgehog has quickly churned out 3, potentially 4 films before we even hear of another entry in the live-action Pokémon canon. Guys, he's gotta go fast. And we all know this behavior is much more in tune with cinema industry standards. Movie make money, make more movie. That's why the collective amnesia of Detective Pikachu feels so out of the curve. Because even though you forgot that Golurk was in this movie, looking insanely cool mind you, Unseen Fist, am I right? You definitely did not forget that Sonic used to look like this. 2019 is indeed the era of the over-designed Marvel superhero uniforms, and trying to make everything hyper-realistic was movie studios' recipe for a successful project. But why did Sonic, which wasn't as well received as Detective Pikachu initially, ended up getting multiple successful sequels while Pokémon went radio silent? I think Sonic specifically gives us incredible insight in understanding Detective Pikachu, because with each sequel, the Sonic movies have felt more and more comfortable embracing the fact that Sonic is silly and weird. Like, the first film strongly follows the, well, Sonic is in the real world now and is buddy to a human character trope, while Sonic 3 is constantly churning out Dragon Ball-esque scenes like this. And I think being this confident in your source material is something that Detective Pikachu certainly lacks. Pokémon stories are often coming-of-age stories. They are about the journey, about growing into the best version of yourself, with magical friendly monsters by your side, which basically yield the power of gods. Cozy, whimsical, and fun adventures that studios have again and again felt a lot of difficulty to translate into live action. This is one of the reasons why, for a long time, the community believed it was simply impossible for us to get a live action Pokémon movie without resorting to a grounded, darker approach to make it more realistic, for lack of a better word. There have been many pitches, fanfics, and the viral fan-made teaser for Pokémon Apocalypse that is just nightmare-fueled, but if you're 11 years old, it's the coolest, edgiest thing of all time, but not brand compliant at all, and something like this would never get greenlit by Game Freak, which is why, to this day, in commercials and promotional materials, whenever Pokemon appear side to side with humans, they always keep their cartoony form. In a behind-the-scenes interview about Detective Pikachu, Pokemon Company director Tsunekazu Ishihara talks a bit about this. I've been thinking about the possibility of a live-action Pokemon movie for over 10 years, and I have actually received various proposals from many places, in the form of plot or story ideas. However, to be honest, I wasn't really sure I wanted to make one. It was during the making of the Pokemon Go promotional video and the Super Bowl commercial, which were experiences where the combination of Pokemon and live action felt very real, when I felt it might be possible to make a live action Pokemon movie interesting. And that art direction was really what Ishihara had envisioned for the project. Between fully live action or a 3D CG movie, Ishihara was defending the latter. But the producing company, Legendary Entertainment, which also produced the Minecraft movie, so you get the vibe,
Chicken jockey!
had other ideas. They convinced the Pokemon company to go live action because, as Ishihara said, that's what they did well. Legendary doubled down on the realism of it all and channeled those apocalypse vibes a little bit by deciding to give us real-world, slightly creepy, hyper-texturized, realistic Pokemon. I think this was a bold choice because it is really risky, right? Pokemon are meant to be, more often than not, cute pets. They work well in animation or pixel art, but if you make them too biologically correct, it can really easily weird or gross audiences out, and don't get me wrong, that was definitely the case with a few choices in the film, but the production solution was really smart. In the early 2010s, it was really common to see hyper-realistic Pokemon illustrations going viral in blogs, YouTube, 9gag, you name it. There will always have that kid from middle school that would come over in the computer lab and say, "Hey, have you ever seen what Pokemon would really look like in real life?" Life was so much simpler before generative AI, right? The result was always a scary, texturized, wet, furry rendering of a monster, and I mean, pocket monsters. It does make sense to make them monstrous, but one of the artists whose illustrations were really popular on DeviantArt was RJ Palmer, and Legendary approached him to work as a concept artist in the film. The end result is not as monstrous as Palmer's original work. Ishihara and the Pokemon Company's marketing team would never let that happen. The Pokemon do look incredible and blend in perfectly with the world around them. Mostly the scenes in the wild, the Buffalant, the Bulbasaur, Jigglypuff, and I can only imagine the work that went on here because, well, these Pokemon are all multi-million-dollar trademarks, and there are still plushies to sell. But honestly, dear strangers online, if there's one thing this film did right, was Pikachu. Oh my god, look at Pikachu. Adding this amount of fur to such an iconic design and ending up somehow with a result that is more cute than when we started is honestly insane work. Yes, the Ryan Reynolds of it all is definitely intrinsically linked to the design, but yeah, small tangent, but I always watch films in the original voice version, but the Mario movie specifically, I made sure to watch the Brazilian dub because I'm taking a professional voice actor with a proper accent over Chris Pratt any day.
Que lugar é esse?
Regardless of any personal feelings I might have about Ryan Reynolds, I think he's an actor with a very strong personality, and it completely imprints itself into Pikachu. We are not watching the coffee-obsessed, gritty, Danny DeVito-y Detective Pikachu from the games. It's not something completely new either, like Captain Pikachu. We are watching PG Deadpool, almost exactly the same character, and for that decade in film, I guess it really worked with audiences. Deadpool was a box office hit for a reason, but I think that tied this movie too heavily into a completely different franchise and left less room for it to grow into its own things. The human characters, including Tim, end up the opposite, being quite bland and written to be as non-threatening and safe for an audience as possible. Detective Pikachu swaps genuine character building for a recognizable, quippy archetype because it's what Legendary knows how to sell. The Marvel superhero influence was also directly mentioned by Ishihara, more on that later in the video.
No battles, no trainers, no Pokeballs. A stronger, more harmonious world.
Rhyme City's introduction is a direct rejection of everything we associate with Pokemon, and as fans are things that we connect really strongly with. Battles, trainers, Pokeballs, they are not essential to a Pokemon story. Mystery Dungeon and Pokopia are here to prove that, but to discard them in the introduction to this town feels to me as a way to say, just forget the childish idea of the Pokemon world you know and love. This is not it. The classic Pokemon story structure is centered around trainers, teams, or contests, or rangers, but you have a general idea of what the rules of the world are and what to expect from it. People traveling around the world, domestic and wild Pokemon roaming around, children learning how to catch Pokemon. Those are the building blocks we have come to expect from a story set in the Pokemon world. And for someone who grew up with these stories, it was expected to see them too in the first ever live-action Pokemon movie, but Detective Pikachu turns away from this very openly. There is only one brief Pokemon capture scene in the film, and the small taste we have of this wild Pokemon world is cut short when the scene on the train starts and the exposition explaining why Rhyme City is different just begins playing. In the games, Rhyme City is just another city that feels very much in place with the rest of the Pokemon world, but the movie basically turned it into Pokemon London. You see, here humans and Pokemon live in perfect harmony, working side by side. Where have I heard that before? Oh yeah, in kind of every other city in the Pokemon universe. Everyone.
A place where humans and Pokémon can live side by side. Here we live and work together.
Senior City is a place of perfect coexistence between humans and Pokemon is the Pokemon equivalent to that short from Kyle Gordon.
In the city, it's super liberal, but once you leave downtown, it starts to get really redneck.
But for the plot of Detective Pikachu to work, Rhyme City has to say it can only achieve this coexistence by banning the uncivilized and brutish Pokemon battles. Detective Pikachu treats many aspects of Pokemon lore with a lot of cynicism, but I think Pokemon battles are the ones that are hit the strongest. They are presented as rough, gritty, dirty, almost like cockfights in a totally different light than every single other Pokemon adaptation. Except, of course, Pokemon Apocalypse. And I think that choice is what kills whichever little magic there could be in this live-action look at the Pokemon world. I believe there is an attempt from the studio executives at Legendary to grow the story up, to make it appealing to older audiences. Don't worry, this is not as childish and silly as those Ash Ketchum adventure feel-good movies that you liked as a kid. This is the real deal and gritty like the real world. But a more realistic Rhyme City results in a more cynical Pokemon world. The main battle scene in Detective Pikachu happens when Tim's investigation leads them to an illegal underground Pokemon battle arena. This happens inside a dirty club and resembles much more an MMA match or a cockfight than the battles you would often see in Pokemon media. Pikachu is thrown and locked inside a ring, no trainers to be seen on either side except for this guy wearing nail polish and a Macklemore style fur jacket, so you know he's evil, and hands out some PK hack stat editing shenanigans to his Charizard before the fight. Should I go into the queer coding of this entire scene of all these characters as a way to portray something that is forbidden and wrong and frowned upon? I'm not going to go into that, but do you know? Anyway, Charizard. This is a rough-looking Charizard, full of battle scars, in a world where, mind you, modern medicine can cure basically any health issue on any Pokemon whose trainers are not named Arven. Pikachu and Charizard are just locked inside a cage to fight to their death, I guess, until Chimps jumps in Legends Arceus style to get Pikachu out. Put that side by side to what is my favorite battle ever in any Pokemon film, the opening scene to Spell of the Unknown. Ash runs into a trainer, gets into a battle, and we have the whimsical joy of watching 3 minutes of different Pokemon running around in a playground, making use of their environment, and headbutting each other until they get too tired. It's such a chill battle with extremely low stakes, no crazy hyper beams or Pikachu Thunderbolt, just a very slice of life battle which stays true to the feeling of the Pokemon games when bug catcher Stacy challenges you with a team of 3 Metapods. Kids competing in a sport with their friends, not insanely powerful monsters on steroids, but a Quagsire being silly. It's a feeling that Detective Pikachu is sometimes too scared of not looking mature enough for conveying. And after all it's said and done, all the Pokemon get to chill and have lunch together, because no one there is being forced into a cage match. They are always consenting to fight. Okay, I chose a more chill battle to convey a certain vibe that I think this film lacks, and you might say that I'm cherry picking, and you would be a little bit correct, but there are definitely examples of rougher fights in Pokemon where exhaustion hits and near-death scenarios are reached, but those battles only happen in fringe desperate situations where the fate of the world is hanging and Pokemon need to fight beyond their limits to save someone. There is, of course, a little bit of suspension of disbelief required, right? Pokemon battle is, as defined by every single other piece of Pokemon media, a sport, which happens even when there are no humans around, like in Mystery Dungeon. Every Pokemon in a battle is consenting to be there, and if they don't want to fight, they will not fight, as was the case with Ash's Charizard, or even Terrapagos breaking Kieran's Master Ball. If a Pokemon doesn't want to join you, not even 100% catch rate can force it to. Consent is incredibly important in the Pokemon world, and forcing Pokemon to fight against their will is always looked as one of the most cruel acts you can do. And by misunderstanding that core Pokemon world concept, Legendary accidentally made the Pokemon world darker, while trying to make it look realistic. I'm not here to just point at Legendary and say, "You don't understand the franchise I love, you are just so sucking cash-grabbing corporate drones," but, you know, Ishihara also says something that I think connects to this very well. It explicitly clears the disconnection between Pokemon's view of their franchise and the studio's idea for the story. After listening to many different pitches and ideas of where they could bring the movie to, Ishihara felt that none of them were stories that correctly understood what makes Pokemon special. Many of the ideas were about a young boy or girl with superpowers who saved the world along with their Pokemon. They were all things like that, and ideas like that are concepts that can be done in Marvel comics or monster movies. I thought it could be a small adventure that happened one summer, like in Stand By Me. Not a large-scale story about saving the world or the universe, but a story about regular humans like us who don't have magic or special powers, and the adventure that unfolds with their small creatures. But it didn't exactly turn out that way. I love the reference to Stand By Me here, a 1986 classic about the fall from innocence, about growing, about 4 boys who go out on a journey to find a missing kid, an adventure of self-discovery that ends up defining them forever at the end. A coming-of-age classic, and a really strong influence to Pokemon itself since Gen 1. It's a movie that has been referenced again and again through Pokemon media, be it promotional videos and even in the games. In Gen 1 and Gen 7, this is the film that is playing on your home TV as you set out for an adventure. This seems to be a favorite at Game Freak's Letterboxd, and I'm completely on Ishihara's side here. The Pokemon story is a quintessential coming-of-age story, and a smaller-scale film about small people living small adventures with Pokemon by their side would be the moonshot. A film that's not scared of being a little bit unserious and playful and magical and embraces this world would be my absolute dream, And hear me out, Pokemon's perks of being a wallflower. I would commit crimes for that movie. It's this studio approach of not trusting the audience, of trying to make everything as appealing and serious to as broad of an audience as possible, that gave us things like the Super Mario Bros. Movie, which, in retrospect, feels like an absolute fever dream. The briefing room with Nintendo and the studio must have been insane when discussing how to adapt what, and how to make a world that had much less lore back then, tangible and realistic to an 80s audience just fresh out of Tim Burton's Batman. Of course, Detective Pikachu has learned from past mistakes and never comes close to that sort of thing, but the fear of committing to the story is still there, and it's the same fear that made Fox think that the only way to make audiences connect to Son Goku is if he went to high school. There is a little bit of xenophobia in the overly westernization of these stories as a way to make it more accessible, but I'm also not going to delve too much into. But thinking that a movie will only be successful if it follows a very strict structure is such a lost opportunity from a storytelling perspective. But more than that, it's an ignorant perspective, because we know we can do great financially successful movies while fully embracing the Pokemon world. The first Pokemon movie was the highest grossing video game movie ever when it released. Not animated movie, film, period. That's not a film that stops to explain to parents and the audience what a Pokeball is. It trusts its audience. And I think that going into a film a little bit blind, feeling curious to know how things work, is at the end of the day a net positive for storytelling. It generates intrigue and a feeling that there is so much more out there than this 151 Pokemon that we have heard of. That's what all successful Pokemon films do. They don't start with exposition, they just open with a Pokemon battle and the title card drops, trusting the viewer to catch up. Hell, my favorite Pokemon film of all time, The Power of Us, throws you in the middle of a whimsy Ghibli-esque city during a festival while introducing 10 different characters, all with their unique relationships to themselves, to the world, and to Pokemon. And I assure you that every parent in the audience understood it. And I don't know if it's an animation thing or if it's something that Japanese filmmaking leaning into more fantastic elements tend to do, but this happens a lot in Japanese films. Speaking of Ghibli, there is no moment in Chihiro or Howl's Moving Castle that the movie stops to explain the rules of the world, what the creatures are, or where they come from. They exist, and the mystery of not knowing exactly what they are or where they come from is part of what makes them charming and magical. A magical story asks for a magical world. Trying to bring the Pokemon world down to reality, make it look like ours, is always going to cause the dissonance between the values the series upholds and what the studio thinks will sell to the broadest audience possible. And well, it makes it so that some moments of Detective Pikachu feel like edgy fanfic, but it just plays safe. It plays too safe, as a detective mystery and as a Pokemon story, and I understand why they chose to play safe, being haunted by the video game adaptation movie curse, and failing to see that they had already made the most successful video game adaptation of all time. The Pokemon anime is also a video game adaptation, and it's so ingrained in the Pokemon brand that we sometimes forget what a fantastical job it did in adapting the world of this weirdly pixelated game. I learned what Pokemon are and how this world functions from the anime alone. When 8-year-old me picked up Pokemon Silver to play for the first time, without understanding any English, I knew exactly what I had to do. I knew how to battle, I knew how to catch Pokemon because the anime taught me to. And as far as video game adaptation goes, I think that's fantastic work, and a wild transmedia case that feeds into each other that is memorable. Detective Pikachu played safe, performed alright with a likable actor and an engaging story, but you don't get remembered by playing safe. Because if you are a Gen 1er who absolutely loves Charizard, you're not going to remember this scene. But this one over here, this one will stay with you for decades.
I can't believe it!
So that all begs the question, is there a future for this franchise? I'd argue yes. The Great Detective Pikachu is a planned film that, spoilers for the original film, puts Harry Goodman back in the body of Pikachu. And look, while this project sounds promising, it has trouble connecting to that first film. Which, you know what? Yeah, maybe it's disconnected. Who cares? After all, detective stories like Hercule Poirot, Sherlock Holmes, Benoit Blanc, they have sequels that aren't directly connected to the previous film. But the big issue, and I think this says a lot about why these projects might have struggled, is that they had a hard time figuring out how to make the plot accessible to mainstream audiences, while still appealing to hardcore fans. And this is something I think only the Sonic trilogy and the Mario films have managed, though Sonic more successfully. Mario's approach is to turn the entire series into a roller coaster of spectacle that's light on character and plot. Sonic, though, just takes the stories of the games and applies them to this alternate setting, creating a compelling fantasy that just retells what happens in the games. Each film feels more disconnected from the isekai-esque original real world that grounded that first film, but it's also a more organically woven story, and you follow along pretty naturally. But realistically, I don't know what will come out. The future is uncertain, but one thing that is clear is that Pokémon and video game movies do have a future. If I were to bet, though, I'd say most likely the reappearance of Pikachu on cinema would be in a Super Smash Bros. Film, which Super Mario Galaxy seems eager to set up with appearances of Fox McCloud and, well, a couple other Nintendo characters. I feel nervous spoiling about this early on after the film's release, though it's pretty cool, I will say that. You know, little Easter eggs to keep the fans going. Super Smash Bros. Seems inevitable at this point, and Pikachu's a core part of that, so why not weave him in? Still, as of now, the future is unwritten.
Just like that song from Natasha Bedingfield, but I think to sum it up, even though Detective Pikachu was really fun, I also appreciate so much the other weird media adventures the Pokemon franchise is having recently, from Pokemon Concierge to Pokemon Tales, The Misadventures of Sirfetch'd and Pichu, produced by Aardman of all studios, which is super cool. And I would love for this sense of wonder, exploration, and respect for the world they created, and that we love, to also be a little bit touchable, real, and close to us in another future live-action adaptation. And I'm sure Pikachu wants it too. I'd like to thank Ken so much for showing up in this little channel. I think this is the first time I make a writing collab with a big YouTuber before, and it was a blast. If you like discussions such as these in all realms of media criticism and nerdy culture, go check out Ant's channel. You're sure to be finding some incredible writing there. And if you're new here, of course, we talk a lot about Pokemon, but from a more society exists and influences the games we love kind of way. And sometimes I talk about not Pokemon too. Depends on my vibe. So if you enjoy these conversations, don't forget to leave your like. It's YouTube after all. And subscribe to help me sail the deep and treacherous waters of this weird, crazy algorithm. Until next time, see you, hopefully in a more colorful side of the Pokemon world other than Rhyme City.